JT65. The transmitter runs for about 60 seconds in a sequence period. You actually transmit for 50 seconds, and then there's 10 seconds of trying to decode it. And you can see the typical signal to noise ratio signal range is shifted way down compared to FT8. Now, Joe Taylor is not done. He's just invented a new mode called Q65, which improves the sensitivity by 3 dB. And people are starting to experiment with it. I've used it a few times. It seems to work, but right now, for a lot of reasons, JT65 is still pretty much the mainstream. Next slide. So this is what it looks like on the screen. If you've used FT8, that's what's on the top there. You see a lot of signals in one voice bandwidth channel. On moonbounce, you usually only see one station, and you have to kind of squint and put your nose right up on the screen. And where I've kind of circled it in yellow, you see a single, very faint white trace, and that's a signal on JT65B. Now that signal happens to be G4TRA, and I'm going to talk about him in a little while too. Next slide. Of course, when a de-expedition gets on, they draw a pileup. So this is what a pileup looks like on moonbounce with JT65. There are about 12 or 15 stations in the waterfall display there that you can see. They happen to be calling VP2 EMB on Anguilla, which was a de-expedition about a year and a half ago. Next slide. So if you want to try and make your first EME contact, here's what you got to do. You got to get your station ready. You got to hook everything up and make sure it's working. Try listening to a beacon that's normally pretty far away. Make sure you can hear stuff that that's far away and you don't have a lot of noise. Make sure you have a clear shot at the moon. A lot of people don't pay much attention to the moon's orbit or the moon's behavior. Most people think that the moon is only up at night, but the moon came up this afternoon at about 3 o'clock. And it's up right now, and I'm actually seeing some signals over there on my other station. Maybe we'll take a look at them in a few minutes. You have to pick a good day for EME conditions, and yes, there are good days and bad days. You need to be there at moonrise if you have a really small station, because you get 6 dB of gain from ground reflection, which really helps a lot with a small station. And there's a website called livecq.eu, which is sort of like the reverse beacon network or the packet cluster network, but it's a bunch of receivers around the world tuned in to looking at the moon. So if you call CQ on JT65B and these stations can hear you, it will put you out as a spot on that particular website. So if you look on that website for some of the bigger stations that are active, you can try to listen for them and see if you can hear them. Next slide. So I said good moon conditions. Turns out the moon's orbit is slightly elliptical, and the variation in distance from the Earth is about a 2 dB difference in path loss. So conditions are predictably better on certain days of the month. We are right now coming into a period of pretty good moon conditions. So I'm going to be busy the rest of this week. Conditions are bad when the moon is in the same direction as the sun, which we call new moon, because the sun is a very big noise source. But at moonrise, your antenna picks up ground gain of 6 dB. There's another website I noted here, MMM, which stands for Make More Miles on VHF.de, shows the days of good and bad conditions. And most of the serious moonbounce operators with big antennas and big stations focus their time on the good days because they've worked all the big stations already, and they're looking for little guys to get on, and they know that the little guys only have a good chance on good propagation days. So that's when most of the monsters come out on those good days. Next slide. This is the chart that you see on that Make More Miles on VHF website, and you can see on that red trace, that's calculating the degradation, considering both the distance from the moon to the Earth and whether the moon is lined up with the sun or another noisy constellation and so forth. And you can see that a few weeks ago, that is plotting the month of March. And we're getting towards the end of the month, so the degradation is a little bit lower. Signals will be a lot better. When the degradation is high, where that red curve peaks, there's almost nobody on EME because the signals are 10 or 15 dB weaker, and it's hard to work anybody. Next slide. So my first moon bounce contact was actually not on 2 meters. I was up in Maine and I was looking around for some sporadic E. Nothing was happening. I went for a walk. And as I went for a walk, I noticed that the moon was starting to set over in the west. And I came back to the house and W7GJ was on the 6 meter chat room saying that he was firing up on 50.190. So I dialed the receiver there and plugged the headphone output directly into the mic input of my laptop and pointed my step IR towards the setting moon. And nothing was happening for a while. So I was doing something else. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw CQW7GJDN17 pop up on the screen. And the software tells you how much of a delay there is with the signal. And it was a 2.4 second delay. So I knew the signal was coming from the moon. It wasn't sporadic E. So I got all excited. But by the time I figured out how to plug the output of the PC into the radio microphone input, the moon had already gone down. But the next day I got it plugged in and had a QSO on my very first call, calling W7GJ. Now, like I said before, his station was doing most of the work, but I was real happy to get my first moon bounce contact in the log, even though it was on 6 meters and not 2. Next slide. So there's a thing you can do to test out your receiver. This is another episode of target practice. The French government built a radar called GRAVES, which stands, it's some French acronym. It's Grand Réseau, big network of something, 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 something. And I'm over here across the room. I'll be right back. Here we go. It operates just outside the 2 meter band and runs some power with a very big antenna array. They have a separate transmit site and receive site. It's a very useful beacon to test things out. And if I don't know if you can you guys see my camera right now? Or Corey, can you?
Well,
yes, we can see it.
Okay, so right there's my laptop screen, and you see that series of dashes going up the waterfall display. That's the Graves radar running. So it's very easy to see, and that's what it looks like. It looks like a series of pulses. CW radar. So it's a very convenient reference source to make sure everything is working okay. Okay, back to the slides. Next slide. Okay, if you do get on the moon or you want to try and work someone, listen for the big stations. Just like FT8, signals are reported in dB, signal to noise ratio. Look for stations that are in the -10 to -20 dB range. Those are the big guns. If you can see them and decode them, get on one of the chat rooms and ask them for a sched. And they'll be very accommodating because they're all looking for new guys to work. There are separate chat rooms on N0 UK's website for 144 and 432 megahertz. Next slide. So making a QSO is a little bit different from doing it on HF or on 2 meter FM. Moonbounce guys use shorthand signal reports that are derived from the CW days of EME. The CW guys used to use, they don't use signal reports like 599, 579, or whatever. They had the T, M, and O signal reports. T means I hear there's a signal there, keep going. M means I got both call signs, and O means I got both calls, or I guess M meant I could hear a call sign. O means I could hear both call signs. So when K1JT cooked up his digital software, he figured if you got anything on the screen, you were able to copy everything. So the standard report is OOO. And if you hear that report, or you copy that report, you send back R, meaning I received it, and send O back at you. And then your QSO partner will send back RRR. You can enable those in the WSJTX software by turning on the VHF, UHF microwave features and all that stuff. Q65, the new mode, doesn't use the shorthand. It's more like FT8. So if you don't get started on this for a few months, Q65 may have taken over by then. And you may see things that look more like FT8. You set the VFO to the exact kilohertz frequency, like 144, 116.00. Set the transmit frequency. All these settings are pretty much the defaults in the software. And then you're ready to go. Next slide. Here's what the normal QSO sequence looks like. You call CQ with your grid square, you call the other guy, and you see the whole progression. And since each period is 1 minute, a complete standalone contact like this takes 6 minutes to complete. Usually there's a courtesy 73 at the end to signify that the whole thing is in great shape. Next slide. There are some strange things about EME propagation. If you're familiar with Doppler effect, you know, if you bounce a signal off or bounce an audio signal off something that's moving, or like a train going by, that, you know, change in frequency is something that happens when you bounce a signal off the moon, because the moon's moving pretty fast, relatively speaking. It turns out that the frequency shift on 2 meters is about 300 hertz. So 300 hertz higher when the moon is rising, 300 hertz lower when the moon is setting, and the signals just sort of move in frequency, even though the guy is transmitting at the same frequency and you're listening at the same place. The motion of the moon actually changes the frequency that you see. There's also a polarization shift. Spatial polarization shift is geometric and predictable. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. It's very useful in moonbounce to have both horizontal and vertical polarization available on your antennas. Signals do change polarization unpredictably as they go through the Earth's magnetic field, which is called Faraday rotation. And the Earth's magnetic field may be a little different over your head than it is over your QSO partner's head. And that leads to genuine one-way propagation, where one guy will hear the other one, but not vice versa. Even though everything is working right, the physics just makes the contact impossible. Next slide. What happens for spatial polarization shift is, if you look at station A in this picture, he's pointed towards the moon with his horizontal antenna. The signal bounces off the moon and it comes back to station B, but where it comes back on station B, it looks like it's vertical from his perspective. The other night I was contacting a station. I was calling CQ on my horizontal antenna and not getting any answers. And then someone on the chat room said, "Doug, can't you see that guy?" And I looked over on the screen and I didn't see anything. I switched to the vertical antenna and there was a very loud station from the Ukraine calling me. So I had to switch the antenna. Every time I went from transmit to receive, I had to switch from horizontal to vertical. And that's not at all uncommon. That happens a lot. Next slide. So the station I'm using now on transmit, I use a TS2000 all mode transceiver with an 8877 amplifier that I bought from K1DG. I couldn't resist it when he said he was going to sell his amplifier. I figured that the provenance of that thing was just too much to pass up. And it's a great workhorse. There's a sequencer box. What the sequencer does is make sure that the preamplifier that's out on the tower gets switched out of line so that it doesn't see a kilowatt from the amplifier coming into it and killing it. So the sequencer switches all the relays in the right order. My receive path has the same TS2000. The preamp is a gas-fed preamp out on the tower with a couple of relays. That allowed me to bring separate feed lines for transmit and receive. The antennas are 4 M² 2M28 XPs, which is an antenna that has 14 horizontal elements and 14 vertical elements spaced out on a 34-foot boom. It's a pretty big antenna, and there are 4 of them out there. They're spaced 16 feet apart, both horizontal and vertically, and the cross boom is about 25 feet high. That's one interesting thing about moonbounce. You don't need an antenna up very high. In fact, it's a disadvantage to have the antenna up high because you can see more noise sources that way. My transmit feed line is 7/8 inch heliax, which is very low loss. The receive feed line is DXE 100 max, which is LMR 400 type stuff. The loss of that feed line is not as critical because it's after the preamp. Before I put the preamp out on the tower, I used the heliax for both transmit and receive. And even though it's big, high quality feed line, it's still got about a half a dB of loss, which is a big problem on moonbounce. Moonbounce guys will kill for a half a dB of improved signal. I have separate rotators for azimuth and elevation. Next slide. And that's what the antenna system looks like. There was one day when the moon had just come up, and I pointed the antenna at it and ran outside and took a picture. So that's the obligatory antennas pointed at the moon picture. Next slide. So what have I accomplished to date? I've been doing EME now for about 5 years, off and on. I started with my station up in Maine, which I only had access to in the summer. So there were sort of 3 years where I was only on during the summer, and then I moved all the EME gear to my house in New Hampshire here. I've made 575 initials. Those are separate guys that I've contacted. And of all those contacts, only 4 of them have been on CW. I've worked 73 DXCC entities. I worked 38 states from Maine before I moved everything down in New Hampshire, and I've worked 39 stations from 39 states from here in New Hampshire. If you combine the two, I've contacted 48 states, but unfortunately, the 2 stations are far enough apart that I had to start worked all states all over again. My goal is to get to 100 countries and worked all states, because I've done that on all the other bands from 160 through 6. And I think it's proof that you've kind of accomplished something on a band if you've been able to work 100 countries in all the states. The smallest station I've been able to work was a guy in Russia who was running 9 elements and only 400 watts. The smallest station I was able to copy, but he couldn't copy me, was E51WL out in the Pacific. He was just running a single 9-element Yagi and 100 watts. Now, Corey, I don't know if this is going to work, but try clicking on that speaker icon there, because, and see if it starts up. And if it starts up, great. Then I'll have you pause it and I'll describe what it is. Okay, pause it right there. Okay, this is a CW contact. I wanted to include this so that you'd be able to tell your friends that you heard a ham radio signal that came off the moon. This is a contact with I2FAK, and you have to listen really, really, really carefully. Make sure there's no noise in your shack or wherever you're watching. But you'll hear on CW I2FAK calling me. You'll hear his call sign and my call sign. The clip's about 30 or 40 seconds long. So go ahead, Corey, and hit the play button. Can you hear my call sign there? And there's I2FAK signal. There you go. So now you can tell everyone you heard what a ham radio signal sounds like coming back off the moon. That's the guy whose antenna I showed you near the beginning is using 16 19-element Yagis. And that was not a very strong signal that you just heard. I wasn't using a CW filter and so forth. So I have great respect for all the guys that went before and did CW moonbounce. Next slide. So here's some of the cool DX I've worked on EME. I've always thought that call signs that start with numbers are really cool because they look and sound very exotic. So here are some of the number call signs that I've worked off the moon. A couple of them were expeditions, and the rest were guys operating from their home. Next slide. I've worked around the world, Africa, Asia. JH0BB is a good friend of mine. It's a little hard to read the one on the lower left, but that's BA4SI in China. I've worked him 3 or 4 times now. Next slide. And here's some other interesting one. RX1AS in Russia, the top left one there. He worked someone the other day and was celebrating the 2,700th initial that he's made. So he's worked 2,700 stations on moonbounce. He's a good guy if you try it yourself. He is very receptive to new stations. He's very, very loud, and he's got a very good receiver. But you see some other stuff here. Kosovo is kind of a cool one. That was an expedition. UN9L in Kazakhstan. I was just about giving up for the night once and saw this little smear of a signal and said, gee, I wonder what that is. And I clicked on it. It was UN9L calling me. So we made that contact. Next slide. And here's a couple of other ones that are worth noting. K6MYC, Mike Stahl is the M of the M squared antenna and rotator and other products line. Very active on moonbounce, and I've worked him. G4TRA, I also mentioned him up front when I showed the picture of what an EME signal looks like. This guy has got to be the most patient ham in the world. He has a single Yagi, I think it's 14 elements or 15 elements. It doesn't elevate, so he can only work stations around moonrise and moonset. So he only gets about an hour of propagation. He's only running 400 watts with that single Yagi. So he really only has much luck for about 3 or 4 days every month for an hour or so at moonrise and an hour or so at moonset. And he's worked about 500 uniques or initials. He's worked 75 DXCC countries. He's worked 40 states. And he's just on there at those particular times, every single time you can count on him being there. And I've worked them both from my main station and from New Hampshire. HS0ZIL at the bottom there from Thailand, that's probably one of my cool long distance contacts. Turns out distance is not an important thing on the moon because everybody's 250,000 miles away from everybody else. They're so far away that it takes 2.5 seconds for the signal to go up and come back. But the tough ones to work are the ones that are on the other side of the world and you don't have common view of the moon at the same time. So HS0ZIL was right at his moonset. It was right at my moonrise. We had about 10 minutes of overlap and we managed to pull off the contact. And that was a pretty cool one. Next slide. Here's a guy who's got a really small station. He goes on grid expeditions doing moonbounce. He packs his entire station into the back of his minivan. He actually has a pickup truck now that he's got most of his stuff in. He can deploy his station in about 60 minutes. He's been on the air in a lot of rare grids, and you can see what he uses for an antenna. It's on a tripod with some cinder blocks holding it down in place. He runs a kilowatt and is very active and works all the big guns. He gets a pileup every time he gets on from a new grid, and he's just having a lot of fun with a very small station. Next slide. So my view is that moonbounce is both the nerdiest and coolest thing in ham radio. When you tell your friends and non-ham neighbors that you're bouncing your signal off the moon, they will think you are really nerdy, but some of them will think it's really cool, if any of your friends are also nerds. You'll never look at the moon the same way again. I was driving home this afternoon and I could see the moon up there saying, geez, I hope I can get home before everyone in Europe goes to bed. I'd like to make a couple of contacts before I do this presentation tonight. It's also kind of addictive. Once you get started, it's hard to quit. I had some mentors here. The first antennas that I had were given to me by one of the local moon bouncers. He said, yeah, I've got some extra antennas here. Take these 4 Yagis. But improving the EME station is never ending. There's always a better antenna you can put up. You might want to automate the rotation to automatically track the moon. I like doing it manually because it gives me something to do every 5 minutes or so. Turn the antenna back so that it's aimed at the moon. You know, there's always a better amplifier. There's always a better sound card for your PC. There's always something that you can do to make the station better. There are guys who've been doing it forever. If you want to start at the top, by the way, if you want to kind of take a shortcut to this, one of the local moonbounce guys here in New Hampshire has decided he really doesn't, he's done everything there is to do on 432 EME, and he has a 29-foot dish that he's trying to get rid of. So get your truck, bring your tools. He will give it away free, but you have to take it down and you have to move it. Shipping not included. Next slide. So if you do get on the moon sometime, look for me on 2 meters. I'm usually active on the chat room, and my station is relatively easy to work. If you're running a single Yagi and a few hundred watts, we can probably make it. And that's my QSL card. And maybe someday you'll get one of them yourself. And that's it.
Nicely done, Doug. Great. I have just a few questions. You talked about the path loss of what, 250 dB, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how much path loss is part of the moon itself? So there's getting there, there's the moon, and getting back. How much is the moon?
The moon's a crummy reflector. The moon only reflects about 7% of what hits it. And the moon is also not a big flat screen bouncing things back. It's round. So when a signal hits it, it scatters off in a whole bunch of different directions. So it's kind of a crummy reflector. But there's a funny story that's told about the CIA once was trying to find out what the Russians were doing with some new radar that they had. And they figured out that if the radar was turning around, every once in a while it'd be pointed towards the moon. And if they got lucky, they might hear it for a few seconds. But it turned out that the Russians were using the moon as target practice. So they had the radar pointed at the moon for days at a time. So the CIA was able to hear it for long, long periods and collect all the information they wanted on the signal.
Now, has somebody recently bounced stuff off Mars?
Not Mars, but Venus. There was a group in Germany that did it. The time for a signal to go from here to the moon is 2.5 seconds to go up and back. The propagation delay from here to Venus and back is, at the time they did it, it was maybe an hour. I'm not sure. It was long. So they had to, and the signals were way weaker than moonbounce. I mean, the moon's just across the street compared to Venus. But so they had some very fancy signals that they sent up and some very fancy signal processing software to do correlation on what little pathetic signal came back, integrating it over a very long period of time. And they finally determined, yep, that's our signal coming back. But since they were using some government dish and lots and lots of power, there wasn't anybody for them to talk to. So the best they could do was send the signal back and prove that it was theirs.
There was a few years ago, they thought that the going from North America to Europe on 2 meters terrestrial had been done. But later, the award, it was not to be. And what happened there?
Well, that was a very interesting one. There's a group that goes to Newfoundland, to a place not too far from where Marconi was set up, sending his HF signals or medium frequency signals to try and get across the Atlantic, because that's the closest point to continental Europe. So they set up a 100-foot long Yagi antenna, a rope Yagi with 53 elements. And they ran a kilowatt and they pointed it at Ireland and England and just let the beacon fly for a while. And there were guys on the other side listening for it. And one of them, a guy in England, got very excited because he got a decode of the CQ from them. So he was all excited. So he contacted them by email or chat room and said, hey, we're almost here. Listen for me. I'm calling you. And they tried for another couple of hours and didn't make the contact. But it turned out that upon further analysis, there was, it turned out the International Space Station was over the North Atlantic at about that exact time. K1JT and a few other guys went through the arithmetic to see what the Doppler shift would have been during that period when they got that one signal being received in England. And they said, yeah, that bounced off the International Space Station. That was not a terrestrial contact and it doesn't count. It turns out that some of the moon bounce guys are actually doing ISS bounce. I guess it works pretty well on 1296 and pretty well on 432. I don't think you can do it on 2 meters, but yeah, the Brendan Award still has not been claimed. I've given up on it. I've come to the conclusion that the North Atlantic path is not right. but I'm hoping that my friend W2SC is going to build a station on Barbados. His old station had to come down, but I'm hoping when he builds his new station, he'll invite me to come down because that's about the right place to do it. And we'll make a sked with a big station in Portugal, and we'll claim the Brendan Trophy.
There we go. That will be something special. Speaking of special, talk a little bit about your foot in country.
That's got nothing to do with moonbounce, Tim. Come on, you're getting off topic. But I'll answer your question because I'll be polite. There is a group called DXFC, not DXCC, but DXFC.org. You can look it up on the web. And it stands for DX Foot in Country, and it's for DXers who like to travel. And people keep track of how many countries they've set foot in and how many they've operated from. So that's another one of my bucket list things, is to get to 100 countries on DXFC. I'm at 89 now, and this pandemic thing is killing me. But hang on a second, a question just came up in the chat that I have to cheat to answer. Hold on. Question was, which two states have I not worked on at the moon? They are Nevada and Wyoming. Sorry, Nevada and Iowa.
Wow.
Oh, actually, I'm wrong. There are 4 states: Iowa, Maine, Nevada, and Wyoming. It turns out that close-in states are very hard to work on moonbounce. They're easy to work, of course, by just a terrestrial signal, but you have to catch a guy right at moonrise or moonset so that his moon signal is 300 hertz away from his terrestrial signal. There's a ham here in New Hampshire who's about 50 miles away, and he's enormously loud direct. But we send little joke messages to each other when there are times when if the moon is in a position where we're off the side of each other's antennas, sometimes the moonbound signal is louder than the terrestrial signal. So we compare notes on that.
About questions for Doug, K1DG.
Give me some questions.
So is 500 miles far enough away to be able to make a moon bounce contact without confusing yourself?
If it's close to moonrise or moonset, yeah. It's a little hard though when the moon is right over your head or at its highest point, because at that point the Doppler shift is 0, and the terrestrial signal and the moon signal are right on top of each other, and they QRM each other. But yeah, you can work guys 500 miles. The guy that in New Hampshire was only 50 miles away, I have worked him off the moon with a definite moon signal.
Thanks.
And I'm trying to get Maine. I'm trying to get K1WHS back on the air, so he promised that he'd do it this summer, and I'll work him at moonrise.
Other questions for Doug?
I have one more question since nobody's speaking up. If you're going to get on at moonrise and work somebody with 1 Yagi, what's the general azimuth range that you should expect to be covering, from somebody at, a given latitude? How do you calculate that, and how many, degrees of range do you need to be able to cover?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I guess I should have mentioned that before. This is my first moonbounce talk ever, by the way. So I kind of was winging it about what I should cover and what topics were important and which ones weren't. It turns out that across most of North America, moonrise varies through the month. You can go online and look at moonrise and moonset calculator. There's actually websites for that, of course. And for every day of the month, it'll tell you what time the moon is rising. It's about an hour later every day than it was the previous day. And it'll tell you what azimuth heading the moon rises at. From here in North America, the furthest north that I've ever seen it rise is at about 55 degrees, so sort of towards Europe. Then it progresses across the sky towards the south and up overhead. The highest I've ever seen is about 70 degrees here in the Northern Hemisphere. It never goes overhead. But for guys close to the equator, it does go right over their head. But But anyway, it then sets in the west, and the furthest north I've seen it set is about 290 or maybe 300 degrees. So a good moonrise shot. It turns out there's a lot more activity in Europe than there is in North America or in Asia, both because there's a lot of population and there's a lot of interest and a lot of very technically savvy hands.
Why should EME be different than every other thing in ham radio?
Exactly. You know, someone mentioned earlier that this KA6 LMS special event thing for the Last Man Standing TV show is going on. I signed up to use that call on moonbounce. So as soon as we're done with this call, I'm stepping over there to my moonbounce station, and I'm going to change my call sign to KA6 LMS Portable 1 and cook up a nice roaring pileup. But tomorrow afternoon, right at moonrise, I expect I'll have the whole screen full of Europeans calling me.
Why is it easier to work moonbounce from Barbados? I mean, work Europe by the moon from Barbados than Maine or New Hampshire or Newfoundland?
That's a good question, and it's, since it hasn't been done from either place, I'm sort of speculating. But from everything I've read about 2-meter propagation, and there are people who are much, much smarter on that than I am, to get over across the Atlantic, you either need about 3 or 4 and possibly 5 hops of sporadic E. Now, 2-meter sporadic E does happen, but getting 5 hops to line up is highly improbable. So you need other propagation. The other long haul propagation modes on the 2-meter terrestrial are tropospheric scatter and ducting, and meteor scatter. So my guess is that the highest probability of getting a signal across the Atlantic is going to be a combination of multiple modes. It's probably going to be meteor, during a meteor shower to get a good reflection off some meteor trails, coupling into a tropospheric duct. And the problem is that the North Atlantic is, the water is too cold and too rough, and it breaks up any tropoducting. On the other hand, at the mid-latitudes and lower and closer to the equator and from the Caribbean, they get tropoducting a lot. There've been a lot of tropoducting QSOs between the Caribbean and Cape Verde, for example, over the last couple of years, all the way up to 432 megahertz. So you need warmer water to get a tropo inversion and get a duct to form. I don't think you can get a duct all the way to Europe, but I think coupling from a duct, if it sort of falls apart at one end and it happens to be during a meteor shower, you might get a second reflection off a meteor path. So that's where why I think it's a higher probability. There's a lot of anecdotal things where people have claimed they've seen signals on VHF across the Atlantic without any other signals, or without any other repeating mechanisms or echoing mechanisms like the moon or a satellite. But none of those have ever been confirmed. Someone just put a note up in the chat room asking, what was that? Can you bounce signals off geostationary satellites? Well, the first big satellites, the first satellites that were used for TV, the old Echo and Telstar satellites, were basically just giant reflective balloons, 100 meters or so in diameter. And so they had ground stations tracking them, bouncing signals off them like that. Most of the geostationary satellites that are up there are a lot smaller and make kind of crummy reflectors. So it may be possible, but the space station is a lot bigger and a lot easier to target.
Other questions for Doug?
On moonrise,
Mm-hmm.
on moonrise, is the Doppler shifted towards the red or towards the blue? I would guess the red.
Towards the red or towards the blue? Let's see, I have to think in terms of frequency. I guess blue is higher in frequency, so it's more towards the blue. So if a guy is transmitting on 144.1000000 at moonrise, when you're looking for him, he'll be 300 or 350 hertz above that. And then if you watch that signal over the course of the moon pass, if the same guy stays on, his signal will slowly shift until when the moon is right over your head, or the combination of Doppler shift from his side and your side compensate for each other. You'll see the signal right at 144, 100.000, and then it will slowly go lower in frequency, and that's how it'll go. When I watched that radar in France, at moonrise, it's at about plus 250 hertz, and at moonset, well, I don't see it at moonset because the moon sets way earlier for him than it does for me. But when his moon sets, he's slightly below the nominal frequency. And I see my own echoes too. My own echoes are shifted by Doppler.
So is it more to the rotation of the Earth or the orbit of the moon?
It's the orbit of the moon, because the moon's moving pretty fast as it rises.
But doesn't it go from west to east in its rotation?
Nope, comes from east, goes east to west.
That's how we see it because of the rotation of the Earth.
Yeah, I don't want to get all tangled up in rotational astromechanical geometrics. But let me answer a question that you're not asking, which is, how come we only see the same side of the moon all the time? How come we don't see the other side? And isn't that a question you wanted to ask? You're the kind of guy who would ask that question, aren't you, Mike?
Well, it's because the moon's orbit and its rotation are in phase.
Well, that's sort of right. It turns out the moon rotates at exactly the same speed that it goes around the Earth. So there's that one side of the moon is always facing us. The moon is actually rotating. It's not just sort of hanging there. It actually is rotating. The problem is we're rotating at exactly the same speed. So we see the same piece of it all the time.
I thought that's what I said. Oh, well.
All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, I got one for you.
Yep.
So other than buying equipment from people who are upgrading, do you have any tips on, for somebody who wants to get started in EME, because it seems like it's a million parts and pieces, right? What do you think are the most essential or most successful, places to start? Any pointers that you can share for those who are looking to get started?
I can sort of speak to that. Wow, look at the size of that monitor. Jeez. So the one of the local hams here, WA1Z, decided he wanted to make at least one moonbounce contact in his life. So he dragged his IC706, 10 feet of LMR 400, and an 11-element Yagi on a tripod out into his front yard. He grabbed a brick amplifier, which was, one of these old FM brick type things. The amplifier doesn't have to be that linear because the signal that's being transmitted is basically FSK, so you don't have to have any great linearity. So he had like a 300-watt brick that had a preamp in it, and he fired the thing up at the moon, and sure enough, he worked some of the big stations right on the first try. So if you want to just start and check the box, any sideband, 2-meter sideband transceiver you've got, a brick amplifier, if you've got 100 watts and an 11-element beam, that's a good starting point. So you can make one contact, check the box, and be done with it. On the other hand, once you make the first contact, all the other guys on the chat room, all the other big guns are going to ask you for a sked, and then you'll work 2 guys, and then 3 guys, and then 5 guys, and then there'll be a guy you can't work. And then you'll want to get a preamp so you can hear better, and a bigger antenna so they can hear you better, and it's never ending. So you can sort of start with anything you've got as long as you have kind of the minimum of about 100 watts, an FM transceiver, a clear shot at the moon, 9, 10, 11 elements. More is better. And if you have a really short feed line, you can probably get by without a preamp, but that will be your next investment after that. I started out with a transverter that I got used for very cheap. It turned out to be very drifty. So I had to upgrade that by building a GPS locked oscillator for the local oscillator. I mean, you can go crazy with this stuff. You can build little Arduino or Raspberry Pi things to track the moon with your rotator. But the starting point can be very, very modest.
So just to follow on to that, let's say that you had a single Yagi and 100 watts on 2 meters. What do you think is a reasonable number of initials to work over maybe the course of a year with that kind of a setup? Just ballpark it so people have an idea.
You could probably work the first couple of dozen loud guys with a station like that. If you're careful and you get on during the times when conditions are most favorable, and you get on when you have ground gain. Once the moon gets up out of your ground gain lobe, then if you can't tip the antenna and point it at the moon, you're going to be in trouble and you not going to work anything. But I would say that a couple dozen stations is not unrealistic for 100 watts, 11 element beam, and paying attention to details.
And you made your first 500 roughly with 4 Yagis and a kilowatt, right? Just for scale.
Yeah, 4 9 element beams and somewhere between 500 watts and a kilowatt. Yeah.
I've got a follow-on question to Russ's, which is, I remember people talking about 2 meter EME, 30 or 40 years ago. And it seems like what I remember hearing is they'd say, well, if you got 4 17B2s and a pair of 4CX 250s, that's enough on a good night to hear your own echoes. And so given now that we're doing, digital stuff and this and that, I guess my question is, what do you have to get up to be able to hear yourself on a good night?
Pretty much the same. If you want to actually hear yourself with ears.
No, I mean just with a digital, all
just
those,
just to see your own echo come back on the screen. I could see my echoes most of the time with 4 9 element Yagis and 500 watts or so.
Mm-hmm.
With this new antenna that I've had up for about 6 months now, which is the 4 14 element antennas and a real kilowatt. I see my echoes almost all the time come back on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another question just came up in the chat. Is moonbounce easier during perigee versus apogee in orbit? Well, perigee means the moon is closest to the Earth. Apogee means it's the furthest away, and it's 2 dB easier at perigee than it is at apogee. So that's the answer to that question. Anybody else?
Perigee doesn't necessarily mean that the moon is in a good place in the sky, though.
That's true. The moon can be in a terrible place. Does the moon phase make any difference in moon bounce? Yes, but indirectly. The moon goes through the various phases of new moon, crescent, waxing crescent, quarter, half, waning, and all the way to full moon in the middle. The moon phase of new moon means that the moon and the sun are in pretty much the same position in the sky, which is why you can't see the moon, because the side that we can't see is the one that's getting lit up, and the one that's facing towards us is the one that's in the dark. And when you have when the moon is sitting in front of a huge noise source like the sun, it becomes a problem. Guys with really sensitive receivers and really big antennas actually do testing to see how much sun noise they get versus pointing at a cold part of the sky. My antennas are probably good enough to do that, but I'm in a neighborhood situation, and I have enough other local noise sources that dominate, so I don't really hear sun noise. There have been days when at new moon where even when the moon was high in the sky and the antenna was not pointed at any of the local noise sources, that I should have been able to hear signals, but I couldn't. And I think that might have been sun noise, but I didn't do any real experimenting to see if that's what it was.
Doug, if you had to say one contact stands out as your best moon bounce contact, what would it be?
Well, I started making a list a few weeks ago of to see what the smallest station was that I had worked. And the smallest one I worked was that Russian guy with 9 elements and 400 watts. That's pretty cool. That and the HS0 contact are very, very cool. It's a little different from HF because on HF, working DX, working guys that are very far away is the big thing. Well, everybody's the same distance. New Jersey is as far away from me as Australia, pretty much off the moon. So, you know, working an Australian, although the first Australian I worked was an interesting one because it was right at my moon set, and I have 2 different decoder software running, and one decoder decoded his call sign, and the other decoder decoded his report. Neither one decoded both, which was kind of weird, but the decoders have slightly different algorithms, and sometimes one's better than the other. So I think RV3IG was one of the coolest ones. G4TRA was cool because we were trying for about a half an hour. His signal was right, I could see the trace, but it wasn't decoding. And then when he hit his ground gain lobe, his signal went from -31 not decoding to -22 and decoding perfectly. And we made the contact, and 2 minutes later, his signal just sank right down into the noise again and disappeared. It's just like working gray line on
I was
160.
going to say, it sounds like 160.
It's a lot like it. I guess that may be why it's appealing to me. But there's parts that are predictable to the propagation and parts that are completely unpredictable. Like Faraday rotation will kill you, and you won't know it. When my first antennas were all horizontal, and I was working a guy in Finland who I just could not copy. He was copying me fine, and it took an hour to complete the contact because the Faraday rotation eventually turned the signal around enough, and then I could hear him, and then we completed the contact. So Faraday rotation can change your signal anywhere from over a period of a couple of minutes to a period of a couple of hours. I used to work ZS4TX frequently when he was a little bit more active, and the spatial polarization was almost exactly 90 degrees between us. So I would transmit horizontal, he would transmit vertically, and we'd have perfect propagation between us. But if we were both horizontal, nothing. Weather effect, humid, dry, rain or snow, help or hurt moonbounce. Pretty much none of the above. I guess you can get snow static and rain static up on those frequencies. My antennas are very sensitive to water on the elements. I was on last week and I could tell when it started to rain because the SWR went up to 3 to 1 and all the signals went down by several dB. So that was the end of that. And when the antennas iced up during the winter, that was the end of that. Does time of year help in making moonbounce easier or harder? It's more time of month than time of year. Every month there are good days, and some of those days are really good. And every month there are bad days, and at which point it's time to get on HF and work guys there, or go play golf, or go do something different. Are you always decoding on both horizontal and vertical on each over? I should switch frequently between them. I don't switch as much as I could. I had sort of a problem with a guy last week when I wasn't switching, and he was getting frustrated because my signal was pretty big there and I wasn't copying him, but I switched to the other polarization and there he was. It is possible with a program called MAP 65 and some slightly more complicated switching. If you bring the feed lines for horizontal and vertical both into the shack, run each of them into an SDR and run the output of the SDR into the this MAP 65 software, it will automatically decode based on how loud the signal is coming in horizontal and how much coming in vertical. It'll figure out what angle you're actually being seen with. On that livecq.eu website, most of the receivers that are feeding it are using the MAP 65 software. And it's kind of interesting because you can call CQ and then look to see if you're being skimmed, basically like a skimmer. And you can see what angle you're coming in at. 45 degrees is terrible because it's 3 dB worse than either horizontal or vertical. And if you're trying to work a guy who only has a vertical antenna and you're coming in at 45 degrees, you're 3 dB weaker than you should be. But if you transmit horizontal and you see you're coming down vertical on the other side and you're trying to work someone who's horizontal, then you switch to vertical, transmit vertical, he'll hear you horizontal. Was polarization symmetric? Nope. The best angle from one end is not always the same on both transmit and receive. That's why it's crazy to switch back. You go crazy switching back and forth. There's a moon bouncer in Japan who can actually physically rotate his whole antenna array from horizontal to vertical. And he keeps track of what polarization he's hearing and which polarization he's being heard on, and whether it's the same in both directions or different. And I looked at his statistics once a while ago, and I think 25% of the time he had to transmit and receive on opposite polarities, opposite polarizations to be able to make the contact. K2ZJ in upstate New York has 2 Yagis that he can rotate completely, and he's always dialing around to figure out where guys are coming in. Sometimes they're at 45 degrees, sometimes at 30, sometimes at 135. And sometimes he has to rotate the antenna to transmit so guys can hear him. So it's kind of maddening. It's sort of like Tim's receiving antennas on 160 and 80. There's, you know there's a signal there, but you're dialing around from the beverages to the verticals to something else, to something else, to something else, until finally you hear something. Anything else?
Other questions for Doug? Well, it sounds like you may have done it, DG. You've got, unless there's something in the chat there.
Well, it says, what is the longest theoretical moon bounce contact that can be made? Well, I guess you'd have to take a globe and put your station on one edge of it and take a Sharpie or something and go all the way around and try and figure out where the opposite point on the Earth is, and try and find see if there's a station there that you want to try and work. I did, there is a website where you can, between any 2 stations, calculate what days there is some overlap, and the times when there's the fewest minutes of overlap. Those are the most challenging contacts, but I think you can pretty much work any part of the Earth if there's a cooperative station at the other end who gets on at the right time. In the distant future, could a repeater be placed on the moon to help moon bounce? Oh, where's the fun of that? All right, well, thanks very much for your attention, guys. I went way over. I mean, sorry about the little misfire at the beginning, but glad we got it together. Thanks, Corey, for piloting the slides through and keeping me going, and appreciate your